it's Angie from Canterbury Trails Farm. I was trying to think of sewing projects and I wanted to find something to make for my daughter for Valentine's Day. I had a pile of, in my package of stuff that, that I acquire and then I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with, of head scarves. I actually might keep that one now that I'm looking at it. That's sort of pretty. That, because I buy for my hair and everything, but I buy them in like bunches, like on Amazon. You can buy like 6 and you don't get to pick them out. They just come in like, that's why they're cheap, because you don't get to pick them out. Sometimes you get to pick the color group and that's about it. Same thing on, these are sari squares. They're like remnant, they're new sari fabric. The industry uses them to make headscarves with, the remnants. And you can, they're sold as sari wraps. They're like, I don't know, 36 inches, like a yard. And they're sold as wraps to wrap presents with, or pillows, or whatever you want to do, crafty projects. Anyway, so I had several of these. Those two are alike. And then I had some satiny ones. I don't think I want to mix the fabrics, the sari fabrics, but anyway, the idea is, my oldest daughter and her boyfriends, they like to do picnics a lot, and so I thought, probably knowing her, she's probably planning a Valentine's picnic. Granted, the weather, this one's really, my idea was to make them a picnic blanket. So I thought I could take 4 of either the sari scarves or the head scarves and sew them together and make a picnic blanket. All of these are really sort of bright color. Well, there's 2 red ones. That's sort of Christmassy, those 2. The red ones, and there's the bright green one. But these are sort of sheer. I have the satiny one, so I think I will take I don't really like this color, but we'll make it work. So I got 2 lighter ones and 2 brighter ones. Anyway, so I thought the 4 of them sewn together, and then with this, I have a crib size batting I'm going to cut down, synthetic batting, and then the outside, the white, so that way if she doesn't want to use the real flashy, cheery side, she can use the white side, and that thin crib batting will give it just enough oomph, to be like a blanket, not just of fabric on the ground. I think this looks. So I thought, let's sew this 4 together on the top, stitch through, and then do the white background. All right, to start our picnic blanket, and I went through and I weighed mixing the sari fabric with the satiny scarf fabric. Which did I want to do? I settled on keeping it all. The sari seemed really sheer to me, unless I was going to use a darker colored background, which I wasn't. So I decided to go with the satiny scarves. I had a new bolt of just bleak white muslin, and I decided to use that. Now, the white muslin is 36 inches wide. The scarf is 36 inches wide. So total, since I'm using a total of 4 scarves. So each of those are 36 inches square. So it's going to be 72 inches square is what the picnic blanket would be. So it'll be 72 wide, 72 long. I had to cut 2 lengths of the muslin, and I'll have to do a hem up the middle, which will make it a little bit smaller than 72 inches, since it's 36 and 36. When I do a hem up the middle, I'll try to do like a 1/2 inch hem, just to make sure, maybe a 1/4 inch. We'll see. I don't want to make it too narrow a hem, because I don't want it to rip out or something. So we'll see what, so anyway, so it's okay, because these scarves, I mean, I can do, it's going to just end up being smaller when I fold the border over. It's going to be like, if you've ever made a quilt or observed a quilt, the edges are either folded over with some sort of bias tape, or they're self-folded over, sometimes up to 1 inch to 2 inches, depending on the type of quilt. This is probably going to have about 1 inch border, maybe more. We'll see what it looks like when we get it sewn and get it together. So before we start the project, you're going to need 4 36 inch by 36 inch squares. You could do it larger or smaller, but they all need to be the same size. So you'll need the 4 squares. You'll need backing fabric that is large enough, and you're also going to need some sort of either an old wool blanket or an old blanket of some sort, or batting. Now, I bought a new quilt batting thinking that would be big enough. So then I have part of a queen batting, 110 by 110, but I think I cut off part of it, 2 battings, and so I might have to cobble some pieces together or something. So we'll see. But I have enough. It just might not be all in one piece. So it's just acrylic fiber fill batting. It's low loft. It's not big. I mean, it's a picnic blanket. So we want it to be able to be rolled up and contained neatly and condensed, like not like a great big huge blanket. The very first thing I'm going to be doing is just sewing my two backing fabrics together. I'm going to try to do this without pins. If you feel more confident with straight pins, by all means, pin your stuff. If you follow most of my videos, you know I love doing a straight stitch and then following that up with a zigzag to make it tougher and more durable. So that's what we'll be doing. So we'll be doing straight stitch first. Quick measure and see what we came out just under 72. And there we go. We're going to take two of the scarves. I'm just going to do it randomly since they're all going together anyway. And putting the right sides of the scarf together. So I am looking at the back sides of the scarf. I'm just going to sew two together. Just pick any, since they're square, just pick any parts. And I am going to put a few pins in this since it's so slippy slidey. And ordinarily I will go on record as saying I hate sewing satiny fabrics. I hate sewing jersey knit. I don't like stretchy anything. I think I've gone on a rant about spandex jeans before too, but I hate sewing it. Okay, so I got it pinned. And just using a straight stitch, just going to sew these two together. Same thing if you use any kind of sari fabric. If it has a little hem, obviously just you're going to sew along. That gives you a nice little straight line to sew along. Okay, and then once we get the straight stitch done, I am going to do the zigzag stitch. Two of them hooked together. So I'm going to do the same thing for these other two. Now I want to sew the longer widths across to form a great big square. I'm going to pin, make sure to align that middle seam so it will, the corners will join exactly in the center of the blanket. That way if your sari fabric or scarves aren't exactly the same width, the difference will be in the edges where we'll be covering it up anyway with the edge of the backing fabric. Good thing about working with the sari wrap fabric or the satin scarves is you already have a hem. If you're working with wool scarves or acrylic scarves that look like they're wool, they may not have a hem. You may not need one if they're cut, you know, like sort of like felted wool, so they don't unravel. Sort of look at the garment or the item that you're using, and if it has a hem, then, you know, if it's too wide of a hem, you might need to take it out unless you don't think it's going to interfere. It really has to do with whatever, you know, item you chose to use. I'm going to do a straight stitch, join these two. Alright, and like I did the rest of them, I'm going to flip it over. Flipping it over also lets you check, since you're now sewing from the opposite side, if some of the fabric got a little bit turned over and you missed it in the seam there. So I find that it is useful. Should have a big square with all of the scarves. Okay. All right. So now we need to find a nice big place to spread this out. I think someplace I have that's big enough. Doesn't involve cats and involves a flat surface. Look who's helping. Poopage is under there. Not making my life easier. Get out of there, dude. Get. Throw your cat out. Now, put a pin directly in the center. I'm going to be putting several pins along the seams. We're going to go back and sew those seams down as well. Go do the other seams, and then we're going to fold the edges over. So we're going to roll the edge over, pin it, and because of this whole satin situation, I'm going to probably be using a lot more pins than I normally would. Alright, let me see. Now I'm going to work on this end, so I'm going to pull this down a little bit. To fold in the corner like this, and then I'm going to fold it under and over like that. So now I have a somewhat mitered corner. And we're going to go sew it. Okay, oh, a little out of breath. Had to remake my bed, had to get rid of another cat. Oh, it's the battlefield of sewing, I guess. So I've got all the pins in place. Now, I hate satin, so let's hope this turns out. So slippy slidey. Okay, I have decided I'm going to use just a zigzag to finish this all up. One, it's fast. Two, and be sure to get all the edges and everything in there. Now, the last time I did a picnic blanket, I did use wool squares, and they were wool scarves. And wool is much easier to sew on than slippy slidey satin. But when I was cooking this idea up, when I found all those sari pieces, the sari wrap, I remembered doing the wool one. I thought, oh, I'll do that too. But I think the sari or this would have been equally slidey had I used the sari chiffons. So
the X or the cross, or the plus sign, whatever you want to think, where we did this, the four corners, and we sewed the scarves together. And then I'll see if I want to do X's. I probably need to, but like I said, I hate sewing on satin, and I'm so afraid that things are going to get bunched up in a mess. So probably, I'm hoping I don't regret this, then I should have just done it by hand, but we'll see. So much faster if I can just whip it out on the machine here. As flat as possible. Sort of holding my breath here. I got it off the sewing machine, and let's see, back up here. There are a couple of small fixable problems. Didn't do the X's. I decided I'm going to do those by hand, just so I can control it more. Right here I had a fold, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold that as flat as I can. I'm going to do I'm just going to hand like stitch the seam, so that way I can make sure it's flat. The other small problem, I'm going to do that across the whole middle. And the other one was the one that we encountered down here, where we had also the same problem. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to roll it up tight against, and I'm going to tuck it under that little bit of a lip there. And I'm going to also do another hand stitched stitch across. It's going to take me a little bit more time, but it's easier. I can, if I'm got it flat and I got it room, my machine is just not big enough to do it flat, and I need to do it flat, and I don't have the room. So just doing it on the floor, doing it by hand. I hand quilt. When I quilt, oftentimes I don't have a quilt frame, so there were two different schools of quilting. When I was in high school, I didn't have a frame, and I quilted a lot. What I did was I went and researched somewhere around freshman year of high school. I went and researched in a couple libraries. I was like, how did women in the pioneer days quilt if they didn't have a quilt frame, or they didn't have room for a quilt frame, or if they were in a covered wagon, or if they were living in some sort of situation? I mean, I know they still had to they still made quilts and stuff, patchwork kind of quilts, and then they quilted the layers together. How did they do it? So I researched, and you have a hoop. There's a frame. There's various different ways of stretching it, like tying. So if you've ever seen like a illustration of Native Americans stretching hides with strings. And then the other way was referred to in a lot of the old writings. It would be "take it in hand" was the phrase, take it in hand. So I did a lot of researching on that, and it was, they would lay down the quilt, and they would do basting stitches throughout the whole, on every, wherever any seam would be, up and down between the blocks, on the sides. They would pull it as tight as they could, and they would baste it. So once their basting seams were in, then they quilted a section or a block at a time. You don't get the stretch, tight finish that you get with a quilt on a frame, but you get an adequate quilt. That's what I started doing back when I was about 14. And I quilted the majority of my quilts, and I did quite a number of them that way. Baby quilts I could do on a big hoop, but I found that once I got used to quilting the way I was quilting, I preferred it. I could also spread it out on the ground in my bedroom, and I quilt on the ground. I find that a little bit more difficult as I get older. I'm not as limber as I used to be, so it's a little hard on the knees, bending over because of my back problems. I've had my back problems since I was 13, so it's always been an issue, but now that I'm stiffer and older, I can't quilt as long as I used to be. Just the bending over starts to get to me. It's easy that way. I can just roll it up and put it away. There's no frame. I did have a frame for a while. It got broke. I had a frame for about 10 years, and it got broke in a move, and I just have never replaced it. I've been talking about recently getting another quilt frame, though, because it's just getting harder for me to do it crawling around on the floor. I'm going to use my quilting techniques to finish up the it's basically two seams that need to be corrected, and then the X's across it. So I wasn't really planning on doing that, but I guess that's what tonight's project is going to be. Where the four headscarves met, I machine stitched. Well, when I got it down and got it laid out, that just didn't seem like
because the fabric was so satiny, it just had too much play in it when you sat on it. So the next thing I did was I just hand quilted, hand stitched, and the best way I could describe that if you're not a quilter is just do a running stitch through all the entire thicknesses of the fabric, through the headscarf, the fiber fill or the batting, and the bottom we'd use that bleached white muslin. So I did a cross on each square. Well, then I sat on it and, you know, moved around to see what that was going to, and it still didn't seem, there still seemed to be too big of pockets. So then what I ended up doing was on top of the T square, I ended up doing an X over it. So then you sort of got a crisscross, like a starburst pattern. And when I got done with that, I was happy with the amount of pocketing, I would say, that was around those starbursts. It was okay. I just wanted it to be so when someone sat down on the blanket, there wasn't all this fabric moving around, and you could tie it if you wanted to. Another thing that would be cute would be to do little buttons, like every, I don't know, you'd have to sit down and plan out your measurements, what you thought looked good. That would be cute. Maybe you could put those on the other underside so that there's just the stitching, the stitch loop was on the side where you sat, depending on what you thought looks cute. There's a lot of room for creativity in there. What I did, I ended up, I just reinforced the fabric a little bit. I did add some time to it, and I originally hadn't planned on doing the hand quilting. I just thought that doing the machine stitching was going to be enough. If you feel confident using your machine to do more lines or tunnels or stitching lines, whatever you want to call them, machine quilting on your picnic blanket, you could do that. My sewing machine is not a quilting machine because I quilt by hand, so I've never bought a machine that can do quilting. The end result was good. It was cute. She loved it. They used it on Valentine's Day for a picnic. The blanket size is up to you. It doesn't have to be my measurements. Just get your materials, lay it out on the ground or a flat surface, and play around with it and see what you find acceptable. It's up to you how big. It just, those perfect squares that come in the sari wraps, or half pieces of sari remnants, or the head scarf that already come, the finished edges for the most part, just makes it a lot easier when you're laying it out and hooking it together. I hope you've enjoyed this quick picnic blanket project, and we'll see you next time.